These are true psychological horror stories from the backroads of Alaska, told quietly, realistically, and without fiction. This is Midnight Whispers Stories. If you listen to horror at night, alone, subscribe now. Because once these roads begin, they do not let you go. Story 1. Road that should have felt familiar. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened on that road in Alaska. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or curses or anything beyond what I can see and touch. I spent 20 years working as a freight driver, hauling cargo across some of the most isolated stretches of highway in North America. I have seen blizzards that could bury a semi in minutes. I have driven through darkness so complete that my headlights felt like the only proof the world still existed. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered on a road I had traveled more times than I could count. It was late September when I took the job, a simple delivery run from Anchorage to a mining operation near the Canadian border. The kind of work I could do in my sleep. I had driven this particular back road dozens of times before, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt cutting through endless forest and tundra. The route was notorious for its isolation. No gas stations, no rest stops, just trees and mountains and the kind of silence that makes you feel like the last person alive. But I knew every turn, every pothole, every mile marker. This road was as familiar to me as my own driveway. I left Anchorage just after sunset, which in late September meant I would be driving in darkness for most of the trip. The sky was already bruising purple when I pulled onto the highway, my truck loaded with mining equipment and supplies. The radio crackled with static as I left the city limits behind, and within 20 minutes, I was surrounded by nothing but wilderness. Thick spruce trees pressed close to the road, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out what little light remained in the sky. The asphalt ahead looked like a black ribbon unfurling into shadow. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I knew this stretch. I recognized the landmarks, the crooked birch tree bent like a question mark, the abandoned ranger station with its collapsed roof, the bridge over Clearwater Creek where ice already clung to the rocks below. But then, somewhere past mile marker 47, something changed. The silence felt heavier, as if the road itself was aware of me. My headlights seemed dimmer somehow, swallowed by a darkness that felt almost solid. And the trees, those familiar trees I had passed countless times, looked different. Twisted, watchful. I told myself it was just fatigue, maybe the angle of the moonlight playing tricks. But my hands tightened on the steering wheel anyway, and a cold knot of unease settled in my stomach. That was when I saw the first sign. It was small, wooden, planted on the shoulder like a grave marker. Hand-painted letters, faded and peeling. It read, "Turn back while you still can." I had never seen that sign before. Not once in all my years driving this route. I slowed down, squinting at it through my side mirror as it disappeared into the darkness behind me. My heart was beating faster now, a steady drum of fear I could not explain. Who would put a sign like that out here? And why? I considered turning around, but the nearest town was over an hour behind me, and the delivery deadline was tight. Besides, I told myself, it was probably just some prank. Kids from one of the villages messing with truckers. Nothing to worry about, so I pressed on, deeper into the forest, deeper into the night. The next sign appeared 5 miles later. Same style, same weathered wood. This one said, "They are watching." My mouth went dry. I scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for eyes, for anything. But there was nothing, just darkness pressing against my windows like something alive. The engine hummed, the tires drummed against asphalt, and beneath it all, I could swear I heard something else. A low, rhythmic sound. Almost like breathing. I turned the radio up, desperate for noise, for distraction. But all I got was static. Thick, churning static that seemed to pulse in time with that horrible breathing sound. I switched it off. The silence that rushed in was worse. It felt deliberate, intentional, like something was listening. That was when the road changed. I noticed it gradually at first. The landmarks were wrong. The bridge I should have crossed 15 minutes ago never appeared. The turnoff for the old logging road was missing. And the mile markers, when I could see them in my headlights, were out of sequence. 49, then 32, then 61. As if distance itself had stopped making sense. I was still on the same road, the same strip of asphalt I had driven 100 times, but it was not the same. It could not be. Panic clawed at my chest. I checked my GPS, but the screen showed nothing. No route, no position, just a blank gray square with a blinking cursor spinning uselessly in the center. My phone had no signal. Not even one bar. I was cut off, alone, and the road ahead just kept unfolding, identical and endless, like driving through a loop that would never end. Then I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder, about 50 yards ahead. An old Peterbilt, rusted and covered in grime, its headlights dark. My first thought was relief. Another driver, someone who might have answers, or at least company. I slowed down, pulling up beside it. My high beams swept across the cab, and my blood turned to ice. There was someone in the driver's seat. A man, slumped forward against the steering wheel, motionless. I honked my horn, a sharp blast that echoed through the trees. He did not move. I honked again. Nothing. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from my truck. The air outside was freezing, colder than it should have been. My breath came out in white clouds, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I approached the Peterbilt slowly, every instinct screaming at me to get back in my truck and drive away. But I had to know. I had to see. I raised my flashlight and tapped on the driver's side window. The man, his head lolled to the side, and I saw his face. Gray skin, hollow eyes, mouth open in a silent scream. He had been dead for days, maybe weeks, and pinned to his chest was a piece of paper, the same hand-painted letters as the signs. It said, "You should have turned back." I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. I needed to leave. I needed to run. But when I turned back to my truck, I froze. There were footprints in the dirt beside my door. Fresh footprints, leading away from my truck and into the trees. Someone, or something, had been standing there while I was gone. I did not think. I just ran. I threw myself into the cab, slammed the door, locked it. My hands fumbled with the keys as I started the engine and slammed my foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing, and I did not look back. I did not dare. The road twisted and turned, and I followed it blindly, no longer caring where it led. I just needed to escape, but no matter how fast I drove, the forest stayed the same. The same trees, the same darkness, the same suffocating silence. And then I saw them, figures standing on the side of the road. Dozens of them, motionless, watching. They were shaped like people, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Their faces were shadows, their eyes pale and glowing. And as I sped past, they turned their heads in unison, tracking me with an attention that felt ancient and hungry. I do not know how long I drove. Hours, maybe days. Time stopped meaning anything. But eventually, impossibly, I saw lights ahead. The glow of a town. Civilization. I almost wept with relief as I crossed into the outskirts, past the first gas station, the first houses. I pulled over in a diner parking lot and sat there, trembling, unable to believe I had made it out. But when I checked my GPS, my stomach dropped. According to the map, I had never left the road. I was still on that same stretch of highway, mile marker 47, exactly where the strangeness had begun. And when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw it. A wooden sign, planted in the diner parking lot behind me. Fresh paint, clear letters. It said, "Welcome back. I still drive for a living. I still take jobs across Alaska. But I have never gone down that road again. And sometimes, late at night, when I am alone on a dark highway, I hear that sound. That low, rhythmic breathing. And I know, deep in my bones, that the road is still waiting for me." Story 2. Last mile. I should have stopped at the gas station in Fairbanks. That thought kept circling back as I stared at my phone, watching the last bar flicker and die somewhere along the Dalton Highway. The screen went dark. No dramatic warning. No sudden drop. Just silence creeping in until I realized I was completely alone. It was November in Alaska, and the sun had abandoned this place weeks ago. 24 hours of darkness that pressed against the windshield like something alive. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the black, illuminating nothing but endless snow and the skeletal remains of trees that looked more dead than dormant. The radio had been static for the last hour, white noise that eventually became more disturbing than the silence. So I turned it off. I was a truck driver, 42 years old, hauling equipment to the oil fields near Prudhoe Bay. This route was supposed to be straightforward. Lonely, sure. Dangerous in winter, absolutely. But I had driven it twice before without incident. This time felt different from the moment I left the last checkpoint. The darkness seemed thicker, heavier, like it was waiting for something. The phone had not lost signal suddenly. It faded so quietly that I only noticed when it was already too late. First, the GPS froze. Then the bars dropped one by one over 30 miles of empty highway. By the time I thought to check, there was nothing. No service, no connection, no exact moment when the world decided to cut me off completely. That is when I saw the hitchhiker. He stood on the shoulder of the road, barely visible in the sweep of my headlights. A figure in dark clothes, one arm raised, not frantically waving, just holding his hand up like he had been standing there for hours, maybe days. I hit the brakes harder than I should have. The truck shuddered, tires finding uncertain purchase on the icy asphalt. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. This was not a place where people just appeared. The nearest town was 60 miles behind me. Nothing ahead except wilderness and drilling platforms. No cars had passed me in over an hour. No lights except mine. So where had this person come from? But I was not a monster. Leaving someone out here in negative 30 degrees was a death sentence. I pulled over, watching him in the side mirror as he walked toward the passenger door. His movements were slow, stiff, probably half frozen already. He climbed in without saying anything. The cold came with him, a wave of air so frigid it made my lungs ache. I turned up the heat, glancing at him as he settled into the seat. Middle-aged, maybe older. Hard to tell with the hood pulled low over his face. His clothes looked wrong. Thin jacket, regular jeans. Nothing that would keep someone alive out here for more than 20 minutes. I asked him where he was headed. He did not answer immediately. Just sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the road disappearing into darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, flat. He said he was trying to get home. I asked where home was. He did not answer. I put the truck in gear and started driving, telling myself I would drop him at the next checkpoint or wherever he needed to go. The cab felt smaller with him in it. The darkness outside pressed closer. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that something was terribly wrong. He smelled like snow, not the clean, crisp scent of fresh powder, but something older. Stale, like he had been buried in it. I cranked the heat higher, but the cold would not leave. It clung to everything, settling into my bones despite the roaring vents. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. 15. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static, harsh and rhythmic like breathing. I turned it off. The quiet was worse, suffocating. I could hear him breathing next to me. Slow, too slow. The kind of breathing that did not sound quite human. That is when I noticed the mirrors. He was not reflected in the rearview mirror. I saw the empty passenger seat behind me, the darkness of the trailer beyond. But when I looked directly at him, he was sitting right there. Solid. Real. I checked the side mirror. Nothing. Just the empty road stretching behind us. My hands tightened on the wheel. Fear crawled up my spine, cold and visceral. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The angle. Something rational. But I knew better. Deep down in that primal part of the brain that recognizes danger, I knew this was not right. I asked him again where he needed to go. He turned his head slowly, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. Pale, too pale. His eyes were dark hollows, reflecting nothing. His lips moved, but the words came a second too late, like his voice was traveling through water. He said he had been waiting a long time. The truck hit something, a bump in the road, maybe, or something else. The jolt snapped my attention forward, and when I looked back at the passenger seat, he was gone. Vanished. The door had not opened. No sound, no movement, just an empty seat in the lingering cold. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, fishtailing on the ice before coming to a shuddering stop in the middle of the highway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I searched the cab, the mirrors, the darkness outside. Nothing. No footprints in the snow. No sign anyone had been there at all. But the cold remained, and something else, a feeling, the certainty that I was being watched. I should have turned around, driven back to Fairbanks and abandoned this haul. Instead, I kept going, paralyzed by routine, maybe, or denial. I told myself I had imagined it, hallucinated from exhaustion and isolation. The mind plays tricks in darkness this complete. It makes you see things that are not there, believe things that cannot be real. The road stretched on, endless, unchanging. Snow and darkness and the horrible certainty that something was following me. I checked the mirrors obsessively, watched for movement in the shadows beyond the headlights. The truck felt wrong now, contaminated, the air too cold, the silence too heavy. Then I saw the lights. Not headlights, not the distant glow of a checkpoint. These were small, flickering, dozens of them scattered across the landscape to my right, deep in the forest where nothing should exist. They moved through the trees in patterns that made no sense. dancing, swirling, drawing closer to the road. I pressed harder on the gas. The speedometer climbed, 40, 50, faster than safe on this ice, but terror had replaced caution. The lights kept pace, gliding through the darkness alongside the highway. Close enough now that I could see they were not flames or flashlights. They were eyes, hundreds of eyes, glowing with their own pale luminescence. Something ran across the road. A shadow, massive and low to the ground. I swerved, nearly losing control. More shapes emerged from the forest. Moving wrong, jointed in places that should not bend. They surrounded the truck, keeping just outside the reach of the headlights. Watching, waiting, the engine began to sputter. Gauges dropped, temperature plummeting despite the heat running full blast. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the windshield, spreading in fractal patterns that looked almost deliberate. Almost like symbols. Then the truck died. Everything. Headlights, dashboard, heat. The sudden darkness was absolute and suffocating. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, listening to the silence. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. Just the creaking of the truck settling and my own ragged breathing. Something tapped on the window. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I did not look, could not look. The tapping moved around the cab, from my window to the windshield to the passenger side. Patient, methodical, testing for a way in. The hitchhiker's voice came from directly behind my head, inside the cab. He said he had been waiting so long for someone to bring him home. I bolted, scrambled for the door handle in the pitch dark, fingers numb and clumsy. The door would not open, locked from the outside somehow. I threw my weight against it, once, twice. On the third impact, it gave way, and I tumbled out into the snow. The cold was immediate and devastating. I ran, away from the truck, away from the road, into the forest where the pale lights still danced between the trees. Branches tore at my face. Snow dragged at my boots. Behind me, I heard footsteps, many footsteps, all moving in perfect unison. I do not know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in that darkness. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Eventually, my legs gave out. I collapsed into a drift, lungs burning, body shaking violently from cold and terror. That is when I saw it. The truth, what this place really was. The snow around me was not snow. Too regular, too perfect. I brushed at it with frozen fingers and felt something underneath. Fabric, then skin, faces pressed up through the white surface. Dozens of them, hundreds, all with their mouths open in silent screams. Frozen mid-terror, they had been waiting too. All of them. Every person who had disappeared on this highway over the decades. Every unsolved missing person case. Every unexplained vanishing. They were here, trapped in the permafrost. Not quite dead, not quite alive, caught in something between. The hitchhiker emerged from the trees. Others came with him, pale figures in outdated clothes. Some looked fresh, others ancient, all with those same hollow eyes. They formed a circle around me, and I understood with horrible clarity that this was not about evil or monsters. It was about loneliness. This place was so isolated, so forgotten, that the darkness itself had grown conscious. Hungry, not for flesh or blood, but for company, for acknowledgement, for proof that something still existed in the endless night. They wanted me to wait with them, to become part of the darkness, to stand on the roadside and flag down the next driver who would never quite make it home. I closed my eyes, accepted it. What choice did I have? The cold was inside me now, in my blood, my bones, turning me into something that belonged here. But then I felt heat, real heat, heard an engine, headlights swept across the forest, and suddenly the figures scattered like shadows fleeing dawn. A vehicle, someone else on the highway. The spirits could not maintain their presence with witnesses. With reality intruding, I crawled toward the light, found the road. The truck that stopped was driven by another hauler, heading south. He asked if I was okay, why I was out here alone. I could not answer, still cannot answer. Really, what words exist for something like that? He drove me back to Fairbanks. I never retrieved my truck, never finished that haul. I quit long-distance driving entirely after that night. Found work in town where the lights stay on and people are never more than a few feet away. But sometimes, late at night, my phone loses signal. Not suddenly. It fades so quietly that I only notice when it is already too late. And in that silence, I hear tapping on the window. Slow, deliberate, patient. They are still waiting up there in the darkness, growing more numerous every year, every disappearance. And one day, when enough of them have gathered, I think they will not need to wait anymore. They will walk south on their own, bringing the darkness with them. looking for others to join their long, cold wait. If these stories feel uncomfortably real, it's because they are. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories now. The road only gets quieter from here. Story 3. Road that wasn't. To there. I should have turned back the second I saw it. That narrow dirt road cutting through the Alaskan wilderness wasn't T on my GPS. It wasn't T on the paper map either. I checked 3 times, tracing my finger along every line until the creases were thin. Nothing, just endless forest where this path now sat, carved between black spruce trees like a scar that refused to heal. The scary part wasn't discovering it. The scary part was realizing I'd driven past this exact spot 100 times before, and the road had never existed until today. My name is Marcus, and I've been hauling freight along Route 3 between Fairbanks and Valdez for 12 years. I know every curve, every pothole, every place where the guardrail has been repaired after some tourist took a corner too fast. The highway is my second home, or it was until last Tuesday when the wilderness decided to show me something new. It was late September, the kind of Alaskan autumn where darkness comes early and stays late, swallowing the world in chunks. I was making my usual run, alone except for the diesel engine, its rumble, and whatever classic rock station could fight through the static. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains, leaving that strange twilight that makes everything look like an old photograph. That's when my headlights caught it. A gap in the trees. A path. The disturbing thing was how it looked both ancient and brand new at the same time. The dirt was smooth, packed down like countless vehicles had traveled it for decades. But the branches overhead were unbroken, reaching across the opening as if they'd been growing there forever, undisturbed by human hands. I slowed the rig to a crawl, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong. Roads don't disappear, especially not here, in a national forest where every trail is mapped and regulated and tracked by rangers who have nothing better to do than hassle drivers about permits. The chilling part was the pull I felt. Not curiosity exactly, something deeper. Something that made my hands grip the wheel tighter and my foot ease off the gas without conscious thought. The road seemed to want me to look at it, to acknowledge it, to make a choice about it. I should have kept driving, should have radioed it in, let the authorities figure it out, kept my schedule and my sanity intact. But turning away felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like walking past a crying child or ignoring someone drowning. Like abandoning something unseen but desperately important. The terrifying truth is, I knew it was a trap. Some part of my brain recognized danger the way animals smell smoke before fire. But I turned the wheel anyway. The tires crunched over gravel as I guided the truck onto the narrow road. Immediately, the sound changed. The engine's rumble grew muffled, like someone had wrapped the entire cab in cotton. The radio died mid-song. No static, no fade, just sudden silence that pressed against my eardrums. The trees closed in, not gradually, but all at once, branches scraping against the trailer with sounds like fingernails on metal. The path ahead looked clear in my headlights, but in the mirrors, I could barely see the highway anymore. Just darkness and twisted shadows that moved wrong, defying the wind direction. I drove for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Time got slippery on that road, stretching and compressing in ways that made my stomach turn. The odometer kept spinning, but the scenery never changed. Same trees, same darkness, same suffocating sense of moving deeper into something that didn't want me to leave. That is when I started seeing the signs. Wooden posts driven into the earth at irregular intervals, each one bearing a single word carved in crude letters. The first one said turn. The second said back. Then now. Then while. Then you. Then can. The eerie thing was how the posts looked. Fresh wood, bright splinters catching my headlights, but the carvings themselves were weathered, worn smooth by decades of exposure. Impossible combinations that made my eyes hurt trying to understand them. I wanted to turn around. God, I wanted to. But the road had grown so narrow that my trailer scraped both sides continuously, sending vibrations through the frame that felt like the truck itself was screaming. There was nowhere to turn, only forward, into whatever waited in the darkness ahead. The air inside the cab grew cold. Not winter cold, but something else. The kind of cold that comes from empty spaces and forgotten places. My breath plumed white, and frost began forming on the inside of the windshield in patterns that looked almost like words. That's when I saw the house. It materialized from the shadows like something surfacing from deep water. A small cabin, maybe 20 feet across, sitting in a clearing that shouldn't exist. Light glowed in its single window, warm and inviting and completely wrong for this place, this situation, this nightmare I'd driven myself into. The scary part was recognizing it. I'd seen this cabin before, not in person, but in an old photograph my grandfather kept in his wallet until the day he died. He'd been a trucker too, hauling supplies to remote Alaskan communities back in the 60s. He showed me that picture once when I was 8, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. "Stay on the highways," he said, his voice raw with something between fear and warning. "Don, to matter what you see. Don, to matter what calls to you. Stay on the highways, or you'll end up like the others." I asked what others. He never answered, just put the photograph away and never mentioned it again. But I remembered that cabin, the same peaked roof, the same crooked chimney, the same window with light that looked too orange to be electric, too steady to be flame. My truck rolled to a stop, not because I braked, but because the engine simply quit. Every system died at once. Lights, heat, radio that was already silent. The sudden darkness was so complete it felt solid, pressing against my skin like ice water. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to my heartbeat thunder in my ears and the creaking of the cooling engine. The horrifying reality of my situation settled over me like a burial shroud. I was alone, miles from anywhere, on a road that shouldn't exist, in front of a house that belonged in a dead man. This nightmare. The cabin door opened. No one came out. The door just swung inward, revealing more of that warm orange light that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. From where I sat, I could see part of the interior. A table, a chair, something dark on the floor that might have been a rug or might have been something else entirely. And movement. Shadows shifting inside, cast by no visible source, stretching across walls and shapes that hurt to look at directly. You know how long I watched that open door? Time had become meaningless on this road, measured only in heartbeats and terrified breaths. But eventually, I understood that sitting in the truck was not safety. It was just delay. Whatever had led me here wanted something, and it would wait forever if necessary. My hand found the door handle. The click of it opening sounded like bones breaking. Cold air rushed in, carrying smells that made no sense. Gasoline and pine needles and something rotten underneath. Something that made my stomach clench and my throat tighten. I stepped down from the cab, my boots hitting dirt that felt too soft, too yielding, like standing on flesh instead of earth. The clearing around the cabin was perfectly circular, and the trees at its edge stood in absolute stillness despite the wind I could hear howling somewhere far above. The chilling detail I noticed was the tire tracks. Not mine, others, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all leading to this same spot and stopping. The disturbing part was how old some of them looked, pressed into dirt that should have erased them seasons ago, preserved like fossils in stone. How many drivers had found this road? How many had made the same choice I did? How many had left? The cabin waited, patient, confident. I started walking toward it, each step feeling like a betrayal of everything I knew about survival. Dawn, to investigate strange sounds. Dawn, to explore abandoned buildings. Dawn, to walk toward danger when every nerve in your body screams to run. But I couldn't run. The road behind me had vanished, swallowed by darkness so complete it looked like the edge of the world. There was only forward now. Only the cabin and its open door and the terrible certainty that this had always been my destination. I reached the threshold and stopped. Up close, the light from inside didn't look warm anymore. It flickered with the rhythm of a struggling heart, casting shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. The smell was stronger here. Decay hidden under pine, death dressed up as home. "Hello," my voice came out broken, barely a whisper. No answer, just the wind and the creaking of old wood and something else. A sound like breathing, but too slow, too deliberate. The breathing of something that had all the time in the world to wait for frightened men to stumble into its trap. I stepped inside. The cabin was bigger than it should have been. The interior stretched back farther than the exterior walls allowed, disappearing into shadows that no light could penetrate. The table I'd seen was real, scarred wood that looked like it had been there for a century. On it sat a ledger, leather-bound and ancient, its pages yellowed and brittle. I approached it without thinking, drawn by the same terrible compulsion that had pulled me onto the road. The book was open to a page filled with names, dozens of them written in different hands, different inks, spanning decades based on the dates beside each entry. And at the bottom, in fresh ink that still glistened wet, was my grandfather, this name, dated 1967, the year he quit trucking, the year he started having nightmares that made him scream himself awake, the year he began drinking himself to sleep every night until cirrhosis took him 15 years later. Beside his name was a single word: turned. My hands were shaking as I flipped back through the pages. More names, more dates, all truckers, I realized, all drivers who knew these roads. And beside every name, that same word, turned. What did it mean? Turned where? Turned into what? The scary thing was the pattern. Every few years, another name appeared, regular as clockwork. The road collecting its tribute, the cabin keeping its records. A horrifying system that had been operating for generations, and it just become its latest entry. I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps, something dragging across the floor. Something heavy and wet and wrong. I didn't want to turn around. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed to keep my eyes forward, to not look, to not acknowledge whatever shared this space with me. But the sound grew closer, accompanied by that too slow breathing and a smell that made my eyes water. I turned. The thing in the corner wasn't hiding. It had always been there, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to understand. It looked almost human, the same way a puppet looks almost human. The proportions were right, but the movements were wrong. Joints bending in directions they shouldn't. Skin that seemed to ripple and shift like it was trying to remember what shape it should hold. And its face. God, its face. My grandfather stared back at me. Not old like I remembered, but young, maybe 30, wearing the same expression from that photograph. Fear and resignation mixed into something that might have been acceptance. But it wasn't to him. Couldn't to be him. He'd been dead for 8 years, buried in a cemetery 300 miles from here. His body wasted by disease and alcohol and whatever horrors this place had shown him. The thing that wore his face smiled, or tried to. The expression didn't work right. Muscles pulling in the wrong order, creating something that hurt to witness. You turned, it said, voice like gravel grinding. They always turn. The road shows itself to those who turn. The terrifying truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't about the cabin. Wasn't about whatever creature wore my grandfather this face. It was about the choice. The turn onto a road that shouldn't exist. The decision to abandon the known path for the mystery of the unknown. Some part of me had always been going to turn. The road had known it, had waited for the right moment, the right darkness, the right vulnerability. And once you turned, once you made that choice, you belonged to whatever waited at the end. What happens now? I managed to ask. The thing, his smile widened, splitting its face in ways that revealed too many teeth. You add your name, you make your turn, you become what feeds the road so it can feed again. It gestured to the ledger with fingers that had too many joints. Right, seal your choice, or the road keeps you anyway, but slowly. So slowly, years of wandering this path, watching it change, watching yourself change, until you remember what you were before you turned. I looked down at the book, saw my name already appearing in fresh ink, written by no hand I could see, letters forming themselves like wounds opening in paper. The chilling realization was that I made my choice the moment I turned onto that road. Everything after was just ceremony, just the slow acknowledgement of a decision already made and irrevocable. I picked up the pen that sat beside the ledger. It was warm, like it had been held recently, like it was always being held by the invisible hands of the doomed. Behind me, the thing that had been my grandfather began to change, collapsing back into shadows and suggestion. Its purpose served. I was alone again, alone except for the breathing darkness and the hungry road and the terrible understanding that this had always been my fate. I wrote my name. The ink flowed like blood. The moment I finished, the cabin vanished. No fade, no transition. 1 second I was inside. The next I was standing beside my truck on the highway. Headlights illuminating normal road, normal trees, normal darkness that belonged to the real world. My GPS showed I'd been driving for exactly 3 minutes since leaving Fairbanks. 3 minutes that felt like hours. 3 minutes that had stolen something I couldn't name. I drove home, finished my route. Life went on. But every time I pass that spot on Route 3, I see it. The narrow dirt road cutting through the wilderness. Still there, still waiting, still hungry. And the disturbing part, I started seeing the road in other places. Different highways, different states. Always narrow, always unmarked, always calling to drivers who Do you realize they've already made their turn? The scary truth is, I know what I am now. What I am becoming. The same thing my grandfather became. The same thing all those names in the ledger became. We're the ones who feed the road, who make it appear to others, who carry the hunger forward, generation after generation, one terrifying choice at a time. And sometimes, late at night, I catch myself hoping someone else will turn. Someone else will see that narrow road and make the choice I made. Because misery doesn't just love company. Sometimes misery needs it to survive. The road is always there, always waiting, and somewhere, right now, a driver is seeing it for the first time. They don't think they have a choice. They don't think they can turn around. They were wrong. We all turned. We were all turning. Forever. Story 4. Headlights that followed. A terrifying true account. I want to tell you something that happened to me 2 years ago. Something so unsettling and absolutely horrifying that I haven't been able to talk about it until now. This is the kind of scary, disturbing experience that rewires your understanding of what is possible in this world. What I am about to share is completely true, and by the time you finish listening, you'll understand why I've been afraid to drive alone ever since. It started on a frozen October night in Alaska, on a stretch of highway between Fairbanks and a small town called Livengood. I was driving alone, which was my first mistake, though I didn't know it then. My name is David, and I am a geological surveyor. I spend half my life on remote roads evaluating mineral deposits and soil composition for mining companies. I've driven thousands of miles through some of the most isolated and eerie terrain in North America. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was completely wrong. The drive at night was supposed to be routine. 3 hours, maybe 3.5. I had left a work site around 8 in the evening, and the October darkness had already swallowed the landscape completely. This far north, the sun disappears early, and the darkness comes with a weight that you can fully understand unless you've experienced it yourself. The kind of darkness that makes you feel like you were the only human being left alive on the entire planet. I remember the road distinctly. It's a creepy, narrow 2-lane highway that cuts through dense forests and open stretches of nothingness. Miles and miles of nothing between you and civilization. The kind of place where your cell phone hasn't worked for over an hour, and the nearest other car could be 50 miles away in either direction. My headlights were the only light source cutting through the black, and even they seemed almost useless against that darkness, barely illuminating the pavement 50 feet ahead. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed the headlights. They appeared in my rearview mirror as 2 distant points of light, white and steady, following behind me on the highway. At first, I didn't think much of it. Other vehicles use this road, though not many at night. But something about these lights felt different. There was something unsettling about the way they hung in the darkness, perfectly centered in my mirror, never wavering, never changing position. I was doing about 60 miles per hour, a reasonable speed for that road at night. The vehicle behind me maintained the exact same distance. I could tell by the relative size of the lights and the width between them that it was probably a truck or an SUV, something large. The lights never grew closer. They never fell back. They just stayed there, fixed in my mirror like a terrifying, chilling presence that refused to leave. 20 minutes passed, maybe 25. The headlights remained. I found myself checking the mirror more frequently, watching for any change in that distance, any indication of what kind of vehicle was back there. The darkness made it impossible to see anything beyond the lights themselves. No shape, no color, no details. Just 2 white orbs floating in the black. I told myself it was nothing. People drove behind other people all the time. It meant nothing, but the horror stories you hear about remote highways began crawling into my mind without invitation. Stories about hitchhikers who were never really there. Stories about phantom vehicles. Stories about people who disappeared on empty roads at night and were found weeks later with no explanation for where they had been or what happened to them. I increased my speed slightly, 65 miles per hour. The headlights maintained their distance. My heart began beating faster. That nervous, uncomfortable sensation starting in my chest. I told myself to stay calm. This was probably some paranoid, irrational fear, the kind of creepy psychological game your mind plays when you tired and alone on an empty road. But I wasn't tired. I was completely alert, and I was beginning to feel genuinely terrified. I tried slowing down, not dramatically, just a few miles per hour. 58 miles per hour. I watched the mirror carefully. The headlights grew slightly closer, just enough to be noticeable, just enough to make my throat tighten. Then I sped up again, back to 65. The lights fell back to their previous distance, maintaining that same, eerie, unsettling gap between us. They were matching my speed perfectly. Whatever was back there, whoever was driving it, was deliberately keeping pace with me. That realization hit me like ice water. This was intentional. This was something more than coincidence. My mind raced through possibilities. None of them good. Was someone following me? A stranger with disturbing intentions? Had someone from the worksite been following me this entire time? I tried to think back, tried to remember if I had seen another vehicle in the parking lot when I left, but I couldn't remember anything clearly. The fear was making my memories fuzzy and unreliable. I considered pulling over and letting them pass, but something prevented me from doing it. Some primal, instinctive part of my brain that had survived for 38 years screamed at me not to stop. The thought of pulling off that road, coming to a complete halt, and waiting in the darkness for those headlights to finally reach me was too horrifying to contemplate. I would rather crash than do that. So I accelerated, 70 miles per hour, 75. The road ahead was relatively straight, and I knew it well enough to push the speed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My eyes darted between the road ahead and the mirror, watching those terrible, nightmarish lights. For a moment, I thought I was creating separation. The lights seemed to be falling back, just slightly. Then they accelerated too, 80 miles per hour, 85. The shadowy forest on either side of the road blurred past in a dangerous, reckless blur. I was alone on a dark highway with someone chasing me at high speed. And there was nothing I could do but keep driving, keep pushing forward toward civilization that felt impossibly far away. The headlights behind me grew larger, brighter, more aggressive. They were closing the gap now. I could feel the fear, that primal, primitive terror that makes your breath come short and your vision start to narrow. And then something horrifying happened. I came to a clearing on the road, a place where the forest opened up and I could see the landscape more clearly. There was a brief moment where the pursuing vehicle came close enough that I caught a glimpse of something in my mirror. It was only a fleeting image, fragmented and incomplete, but what I saw made my blood freeze completely. The vehicle behind me had no driver. I couldn't see anyone through the windshield. The front seats appeared to be completely empty. Those headlights were being powered by something, propelled by something, but there was no human form visible behind the wheel. That chilling, eerie, absolutely horrifying observation lasted only seconds before the forest closed back in and swallowed my view of whatever was behind me. I nearly lost control of the car. My hands jerked the wheel involuntarily, and the vehicle swerved slightly toward the shoulder. I corrected immediately, pulling back toward the center of the road. But my mind was spinning into a place that I didn't want it to go. What I had seen was impossible. Vehicles done to drive themselves. They dawn to chase people down empty highways in the middle of the night with nobody at the wheel. But I had seen it. The empty cab, the darkness where a face should have been. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. The stress, the isolation, the long hours of work in remote locations had finally cracked something in my psychology. I was hallucinating, seeing things that weren't there, creating nightmares out of the darkness and exhaustion. The headlights continued to gain on me. I was pushing the car to nearly 95 miles per hour now, far too fast for that narrow highway, far too fast to be safe. But safety seemed irrelevant when something impossible was hunting me through the darkness. Then I saw something that made me understand exactly how much danger I was actually in. The highway ahead curved to the left, and I could see the curve clearly in my headlights. But beyond that curve, on the straight section ahead, there were other headlights approaching from the opposite direction. Another vehicle, coming toward me. The headlights were distant but visible, maybe a quarter mile away. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt a surge of hope. Salvation. Another human being who could witness whatever this horrifying, supernatural thing was that was chasing me. I started to ease off the accelerator, intending to slow down, intending to meet that oncoming vehicle at a reasonable speed. But then the vehicle behind me accelerated dramatically. I felt my car lurch forward as the vehicle behind made contact with my bumper. The impact was gentle, almost exploratory, but unmistakable. They had deliberately touched my car. The shock of the physical contact, the confirmation that something real and solid was actually behind me, pushed me beyond reason. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator with a desperate, frantic intensity. The needle climbed past 100 miles per hour. The car was shaking now, the engine screaming in protest. The headlights of the oncoming vehicle were growing larger, brighter, approaching fast. I was completely trapped between two forces, one pushing me forward and one coming toward me, and there was nowhere to go but straight into collision. The vehicle behind me hit me again, this time harder. Much harder. The impact knocked my car sideways, and I felt the wheels beginning to lose traction. The eerie darkness and my own survival instinct took over simultaneously. I wrenched the steering wheel hard to the left, directly into the curve that was coming up. The car went into the turn at far too high a speed. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I felt the vehicle beginning to flip. I was going to die. Right here, on this empty, terrifying highway in Alaska, in the darkness, with something that shouldn't exist chasing me into oblivion. I was going to crash and burn. But the car didn't. To flip. Somehow, impossibly, it held the road. The front tires gripped the asphalt, and the curve opened up ahead of me. I saw in my mirror the oncoming vehicle pass behind me just seconds after I had cleared the curve. The headlights illuminated the darkness where I had just been, lighting up the space where I would have been if the curve hadn't provided my escape route. I didn't see the vehicle that had been chasing me hit the oncoming car, but I heard the sound, a terrible, violent, catastrophic sound that seemed to echo across the entire landscape. The sound of metal tearing and glass shattering and the violent physics of two vehicles meeting at terrible speed. In my mirror, I saw a flash of light that was brighter than anything I had seen that entire night. An explosion, a fire beginning to consume the wreckage. I kept driving. I pushed my car forward, away from that nightmare scene, away from whatever had been chasing me. My entire body was shaking, sweat pouring down my face despite the Arctic cold that was seeping through the windows. I drove for another hour without stopping, without slowing down, without checking my mirror except for the terrified, obsessive glances that I couldn't prevent myself from making. When I finally reached Live and Good, I went directly to the police station. The officers there thought I was insane. I was covered in sweat. I was incoherent and terrified, and I was describing an impossible scenario. A vehicle that chased me and had no driver. A collision with another car that I hadn't actually witnessed. They took me seriously enough to investigate. Officers drove back out to the highway to look for evidence of a wreck, to find the burned-out vehicle that I had seen or thought I had seen. They found something. They found wreckage, a vehicle that had collided with an oncoming car at high speed. Multiple deaths. Emergency crews were still working the scene when the officers returned to tell me what they had found. But here was the part that made everything infinitely more terrifying and unsettling. The vehicle that had been chasing me, the one with the empty cab, the one that had rammed my car in the darkness. They could not identify it. The wreckage was too damaged, too burned, too mangled for forensic identification. But the other vehicle, the one I had almost collided with, the one that had been coming toward me from the opposite direction, that vehicle had been occupied by 3 people on their way to Fairbanks. When they pulled the bodies from the wreckage, the forensic examiner told the police something that made my skin crawl. The driver of the oncoming vehicle had defensive wounds on his hands and arms. He had been fighting. He had been struggling with something or someone in the moments before the collision. But there was no evidence of another person in the vehicle. No evidence of a second body. No evidence of any struggle except for the bruises and tears in the skin of the deceased driver. The case was officially classified as an accident. Investigator error, maybe. Excessive speed, certainly. The empty vehicle was never identified. The forensic reports eventually concluded that the unknown vehicle had been stolen, had probably been driven by someone who had died in the crash, though the body was too damaged to confirm any details. They never found out why the driver of the oncoming car had been fighting with something invisible in the moments before impact. I thought about what happened that night every single day for 2 years. I tried to find rational explanations, psychological explanations, any explanation that would make sense of what I experienced and what I saw. But I can find one that fits all the details. I can to reconcile what I witnessed with what police investigations later confirmed. Here is what terrifies me most about this entire horrifying, chilling incident. I never actually saw what was driving that vehicle. In all those moments, in the clearing where I thought I saw an empty cab, I never clearly saw anything except the absence of a driver. And I come to believe that whatever was in that car, whatever had locked onto me with those steadfast, unwavering headlights on that dark Alaska highway, was never actually absent at all. It was just invisible, It was right there the entire time, solid enough to ram my vehicle, powerful enough to chase me down a highway at over 100 miles per hour, but completely invisible to human sight. And when it collided with that oncoming vehicle, the driver had felt it. The driver had fought against it. The driver had died fighting something that couldn't to be seen, something that couldn't to be stopped, something that had wanted him as badly as it had wanted me. The question that haunts me, the eerie thought that keeps me awake at night, is this: why did it stop chasing me? Why did it suddenly shift its attention to that oncoming vehicle and let me escape into the darkness? I drive very carefully now. I never drive alone if I can help it. And I absolutely never, under any circumstances, drive on that highway after dark. Because I can, to shake the feeling that something is still out there on those empty roads, something invisible and terrifying and patient. Something that knew exactly what speed I would drive at, knew exactly when to hit me, knew how to hunt me in the darkness. Something that might still be waiting for me to make a mistake. Something that might be waiting for the next person who drives alone through the creepy, dark wilderness of Alaska at night. The headlights that followed me, they didn't disappear that night. They were still out there, still keeping their distance, still waiting in the darkness for someone who drives too fast, or too slow, or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And one of these nights, somewhere on that terrifying stretch of highway between Fairbanks and Livengood, they might decide to follow you instead. Story 5. Gas station without sound. Something happened to me in Alaska that I have never told another living soul. Not because I thought people wouldn't believe me. I kept quiet because I was afraid that talking about it would bring it back. But after 15 years, I realized that keeping this silence is a different kind of prison. So I am telling you now as a warning, because what I experienced in that small corner of the world might happen to you too. My name is David. I am a 48-year-old man from Seattle. I work in insurance. I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage. I drive a Subaru. I am aggressively, boringly normal. And that is exactly why I need you to hear this story. Because what happened to me wasn't in some exotic, dangerous place. It was on a highway in Alaska, a place that millions of people pass through every year. It was late August. My company sent me to Fairbanks for a work conference. Boring stuff, data analysis, risk assessment, the kind of thing that puts most people to sleep. When the conference ended, instead of flying home directly, I decided to do something different. I wanted to drive the Alaska highway, see the landscape, spend time alone with my thoughts. My wife thought I was crazy, but she supported it. In hindsight, I think she saved my life by making me promise to check in every single night. I left Fairbanks on a Thursday morning. The sun was still up, even though it was nearly 10 o'clock. In August, Alaska's light is almost terrifying in its intensity. There's no real darkness to break things up, just perpetual daylight, which sounds nice until you realize that your body can properly sleep. That constant brightness does something to your mind, makes you feel like time is slipping away. The highway stretched out before me, endless and empty. I drove south, heading toward the lower 48. The landscape was haunting in its beauty. Dense forests of spruce trees, mountains in the distance, occasional small towns with names I couldn't pronounce and populations so tiny they seemed more like ghosts of places than actual towns. By the 3rd day, I had started to feel the creeping discomfort that comes from isolation. Not fear exactly, just an unsettling feeling that something was slightly wrong with the world out here. The absence of normal things. No traffic, no billboards, no signs of human life beyond the occasional town that appeared and then disappeared behind me. I was about 4 hours from the Canadian border when I saw it. The gas station appeared on the right side of the road like a mirage. It was fully lit, brightly illuminated, with fluorescent lights that glowed against the twilight. This was unusual because in Alaska, you can drive for hours without seeing anything but trees and rocks. But there it was, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere. As I got closer, I noticed something wrong. There were no cars, but the lights were all on. The pumps were visible. Everything looked operational and ready to serve customers, except for one problem that grew more terrifying the closer I got. There was no sound. I mean that quite literally. When I pulled up to the pumps, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening. The complete absence of noise was the first truly horrifying thing I encountered on this journey. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic on the highway, no hum of electricity from the lights, just absolute, perfect silence. A silence so complete it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. My gas tank was at a quarter full. I had enough to reach the next town, but not much more. The smart thing would have been to get back in my car and drive on, to find a gas station in an actual populated area. But I had been driving for hours. The thought of stopping, of having human contact, even if it was just a tired gas station attendant, was appealing. I got out of my car. The silence was even more disturbing once I was outside. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the slight rustle of my jacket as I moved. My heartbeat was audible in my ears. But there was nothing else. No ambient noise. No life. The air itself felt dead. I walked toward the building. It was a typical small-town gas station and convenience store combination. The kind you see everywhere in rural America. The front door had a glass window. Through it, I could see the inside was empty. No cashier, no customers, just aisles of products, brightly lit, waiting for someone who would never come. The door was unlocked. I pulled it open, and that silence followed me inside like a stalking predator. The interior was exactly what I would have expected. A row of refrigerated cases along the back wall, shelves of snacks and drinks, a counter with a register, a bathroom door in the corner. Everything was stocked and ready, but utterly devoid of human presence. The creepiest part was that everything was clean. Not a speck of dust. Not a single item out of place. It was as if someone had just left moments before, or as if no one had ever been there at all. I walked to the refrigerated cases and grabbed a bottle of water. I was reaching for some beef jerky when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Every single clock in the store was stopped. There was one on the wall behind the register, one on the cash register itself, another on the wall near the bathroom. All three showed exactly the same time, 4:47. Not 4:48 or 4:46, exactly 4:47. And the moment I noticed this, I understood at a visceral level that something profoundly wrong was happening. I stood frozen in the center of that eerie gas station, my water bottle in one hand, the beef jerky in the other, and I understood that I needed to leave immediately. But my feet wouldn't. They moved. It was as if the silence itself was holding me in place, pinning me to that spot like a butterfly on a board. My lungs felt tight. My vision started to tunnel. I realized I was having a panic attack, and in the middle of that panic, I heard something. A sound. It was the faintest noise, barely perceptible, but it was there. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of the bathroom door. It sounded like breathing. Not my breathing, someone else's breathing, shallow and wet. I turned around to look at the bathroom door. It was still closed. The breathing continued. I could hear it now, a distinct sound underneath the silence. Ragged, labored, wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to run. And finally, my feet obeyed. I dropped the water bottle and the jerky and walked very quickly toward the front door. I didn't to run. Something about maintaining composure felt important. Like if I ran, it would know I was afraid. Like something in this place was watching me, evaluating me, deciding what to do about me. I reached the door. I pulled it open. And that is when I heard it again. The breathing from the bathroom. Except this time, it came from directly behind me. I didn't to turn around. I couldn't to turn around. I stepped through the door and walked to my car at a pace that was almost a run. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key in the ignition. The silence had returned now, perfect and complete, but I was terrified that if I looked in my rearview mirror, I would see something standing in the doorway of that gas station. I didn't look. I started the engine and pulled away, accelerating down the highway. Only after I had been driving for 10 minutes did I finally glance in the mirror. The gas station was far behind me now, still brightly lit, still silent, still impossibly wrong. For the next hour, I drove in a state of pure fear. My mind was racing with explanations. I had imagined the breathing. I was tired. I was experiencing some kind of psychological break from the isolation. But even as I tried to convince myself of these rational explanations, I knew something else was true. There was a presence in that place, something that existed in that silence, in the spaces between sounds, something that didn't follow the rules of our normal world. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a busy hotel lobby and sat there for 20 minutes, just trying to breathe normally. The noise of the place, the sounds of people talking and moving around, felt like a lifeline. It grounded me in reality. That night, I called my wife as promised. I told her I was fine, just tired. I didn't mention the gas station. How could I? She would think I was losing my mind. But I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my hotel room and tried to understand what had happened. I searched my mind for any rational explanation. Carbon monoxide poisoning, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, a prank by someone at the gas station. But none of these explanations felt true. The next morning, I did something I've been ashamed of ever since. I drove back to the gas station. I told myself I was being rational. I needed to prove to myself that it was just a normal place. That my fear had been irrational. That there was a simple explanation for everything I had experienced. The gas station looked exactly the same as before. Brightly lit, empty, silent. This time, I didn't get out of my car. I simply pulled up to the pumps and waited. I wanted to see if anyone would come, if someone would emerge from the building to help me. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10. No one appeared, and that silence pressed down on me just like before. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. In the window of the gas station, in the exact spot where I could have seen the register, there was a face. It was pale and flat against the glass, and it was looking directly at me. I couldn't make out features. It was too far away and the lighting was wrong. But I could feel its attention. I could feel it watching me with an intensity that suggested something profoundly hungry. I drove away, fast, and this time, I didn't slow down until I was back in Fairbanks, where there were other people. Where there was noise, where I felt like I was in the real world again. I finished my drive home the next day, taking commercial flights for the last leg of the journey. I never set foot on that highway again. It took me 7 years before I could talk about what happened. A therapist helped me realize that whether it was real or a psychological event, the terror was genuine. The experience had changed something in me. I spent weeks researching that stretch of highway. I found records of the gas station. It had been shut down in 1984. Officially, it closed because the owner's son disappeared. He was a 17-year-old boy named Michael. One day he was working his shift, and the next day, he simply vanished. No body was ever found. No explanation was ever given. The business closed, but the building remained. It was never demolished or removed. And according to my research, other travelers reported similar stories. Silence. Clocks stopped at the same time. A presence that felt wrong. A face in the window. I have never been back to Alaska. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about that place. I wonder if it is still there, still lit, still silent, still waiting for someone to walk through its doors. And I wonder if that silence is in absence of sound at all. I wonder if it is something else. Something that exists in the space where normal reality breaks down. Something that feeds on the fear of people who stumble into its domain. If you ever find yourself driving through a remote area and you see a brightly lit building that shouldn't be there, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't get out. Don't try to be brave or rational. Because some places in this world exist outside the normal rules of existence. And in those places, silence isn't peaceful. It's alive. It is watching. And it is terrifyingly patient. Story 6. Highway that swallowed time. The most terrifying thing about forgetting is not knowing what you have lost. I learned that on a highway in Alaska, where time stopped making sense and the road became something hungry. What I'm about to tell you is real. Every horrifying detail, every chilling moment. And I need you to believe me, because if you ever find yourself on that stretch of asphalt between Fairbanks and nowhere, you need to know what is waiting out there in the darkness. It started as a routine night shift. I was a medical courier, transporting blood samples and lab specimens between hospitals across Alaska. The job paid well precisely because most people refused to drive through the wilderness at 3 in the morning. But I needed the money, and I told myself the isolation did not bother me. I told myself the darkness was just darkness. Nothing more. I was wrong. I left Fairbanks just after midnight on a Tuesday in October. The temperature had already dropped below freezing, and my breath fogged the windshield as I loaded the insulated containers into my van. The dispatcher gave me the route, the same one I had driven dozens of times. 6 hours to Coldfoot. Simple. Direct. I remember checking my watch as I pulled onto the Richardson Highway. 12:17 in the morning. I remember thinking I would arrive just after sunrise, grab breakfast at the truck stop, and be back home by noon. I never made it to Coldfoot, and I have no idea when I actually left that highway, because the scariest thing was not what I saw. It was realizing I could no longer remember when the drive had started. The first hour felt normal. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the center line in the wall of spruce trees pressing close to the road. The radio played classic rock, crackling occasionally with static. I passed the usual landmarks. The abandoned gas station with the caved-in roof. The mile marker where someone had planted a cross for a fatal accident years ago. The turnoff for the old mining road. Everything was exactly where it should be. But somewhere past mile marker 83, something changed. The road did not change, but the hours passed, and nothing else did. I kept driving, watching the odometer tick upward, but the landscape stayed frozen. The same trees, the same curve ahead, the same stretch of asphalt unfolding endlessly beneath my tires. At first, I thought I was tired. My eyes playing tricks, but then I checked my watch. 3:42 in the morning. I had been driving for over 3 hours. I should have been halfway to Coldfoot by now, deep in the Brooks Range with mountains rising on either side. Instead, I was still surrounded by flat forest, still passing trees that looked identical to the ones I had seen an hour ago. My stomach tightened with an unsettling dread. I pressed harder on the gas, pushing the van to 70, then 80. The engine roared, the speedometer climbed, but the scenery refused to change. That was when I noticed the silence. The radio had gone dead. Not static, not white noise, just complete, suffocating silence. I tried changing stations, but every frequency was empty. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The screen showed 3:51 in the morning, but I had only looked away for a moment. How had 9 minutes passed? I looked at my watch again. 4:03. My phone said 4:03. But I could swear only seconds had gone by. Fear crawled up my spine like cold fingers. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I considered turning around, heading back to Fairbanks, but when I checked my rearview mirror, the road behind me had vanished into a wall of absolute darkness. Not the normal darkness of night. This was different, solid, impenetrable, like staring into a void that swallowed light. I kept driving because there was nothing else to do. The road stretched ahead, endless and unchanging, and with every mile, my sense of time became more distorted. I would glance at my watch and see 5 minutes had passed. Then I would look again, and it would say 2 hours earlier. My phone showed different times every time I checked. 6:30, 3:15, 11:47. None of it made sense. I tried to remember when I had left Fairbanks, tried to picture the moment I pulled out of the parking lot, but the memory felt slippery. Unreal, like something I had dreamed instead of lived. Then I saw the van. It was parked on the shoulder about 100 yards ahead, hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. A white cargo van, identical to mine. Same model, same year, same dent in the rear bumper where I had backed into a loading dock 6 months ago. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowed down, pulling up behind it. This had to be a coincidence. It had to be. But deep down, in the place where instinct lives, I knew better. I left my engine running and stepped out onto the road. The cold hit me like a physical force, burning my lungs with every breath. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. I walked toward the van, my boots crunching on gravel that sounded impossibly loud in the eerie silence. The driver's door was open, swaying slightly in a breeze I could not feel. I looked inside and felt reality crack. There was blood on the steering wheel, dark, dried, and on the dashboard, written in something rust-colored and horrible, were 4 words: "Stop driving or die." My legs went weak. I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This could not be my van. It could not be, but then I saw it, sitting on the passenger seat. My thermos, the one with the faded sticker from a truck stop in Anchorage. The one I had filled with coffee before leaving Fairbanks. The one that was currently sitting in the cup holder of my van, still warm. I ran. I do not remember making the decision. I just found myself sprinting back to my van, throwing myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the key. The engine sputtered, caught, roared to life. I floored the accelerator, and the van lurched forward, tires screaming. In my rearview mirror, I watched the other van recede into darkness. But just before it disappeared, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Someone was standing beside it now, a figure in the same jacket I was wearing, the same build, the same face, and it was watching me leave with an expression of absolute terror. I drove faster, pushing the van to its limits, desperate to escape. But the road would not let me go. No matter how far I traveled, no matter how fast, the landscape stayed the same. The same trees, the same darkness, the same suffocating sense of being trapped in a loop that had no beginning and no end. And my memory kept slipping. I could no longer remember what day it was, Could not remember if I had children waiting at home or if I lived alone. Could not remember my own birthday or the name of the street where I grew up. The road was eating my past, consuming it mile by mile, leaving nothing behind but the present moment and the creeping horror that I had been driving for years. Decades. Forever. Then I saw the others. Vans parked along the shoulder. Dozens of them. All identical. All abandoned. Some with doors hanging open. Some with windows shattered. Some completely dark and silent. And standing beside each one was a figure. Me. All of them were me. Different versions, different moments, all trapped on this nightmare highway. Some looked exhausted, some looked terrified, and some just stared with empty eyes, as if they had forgotten what it meant to be human. I screamed. The sound tore from my throat, raw and desperate, and I realized it was the first noise I had made in hours, or days, or however long I had been driving. The scream echoed in the van, this cabin, and for a moment, just a moment, the road ahead flickered. I saw something else, a turnoff, a dirt road branching away into the forest. It had not been there before. I knew it had not been there, but it was there now, and without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard to the right. The van skidded, tires fighting for purchase, and then I was off the highway, bouncing down a rutted track that wound between the trees. Branches scraped against the windows. The suspension groaned, but I kept going, driven by a desperate hope that this was the way out. That this was escape. The dirt road ended at a clearing. In the center stood a small cabin. Lights burning in the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked warm, safe, real. I stumbled out of the van and ran to the door, pounding with both fists, shouting for help. The door opened, and I fell inside, gasping. An old man stood there, looking down at me with sad eyes. He helped me to a chair by the fire, poured me coffee. I tried to tell him what had happened, tried to explain about the highway and the lost time and the other versions of myself. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said something that shattered my sanity. He said I had been coming to his cabin for 17 years. Every night, same time, same terror, same story, and every morning, I forgot. Every morning, I woke up in my van, back on the highway, convinced I had just left Fairbanks. Convinced it was my first night driving this route. He showed me a wall covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, all of me, different ages, different expressions, but always the same fear, the same moment of realization. I looked at my watch. It said 12:17 in the morning, Tuesday, the exact time I had left Fairbanks. And I understood. Time had not stopped. It had looped, and I was the loop. I had been the loop for longer than I could remember. The old man asked if I wanted to stay, to finally stop driving. But as he spoke, his face began to change. It stretched, twisted, became my face, became every face I had seen standing beside those abandoned vans. And I realized the cabin was not shelter. It was the center of the maze, the heart of the nightmare. And if I stayed, I would never wake up. I ran back to the van. The engine was still running. It had never stopped. I reversed back onto the dirt road, back toward the highway. And as I reached the asphalt, I saw it. The sun, rising over the trees. Real, warm, impossible. I drove into the light, and the world snapped back into focus. Suddenly there were other cars on the road, mile markers in the right order, my phone showing a normal time. I pulled into a gas station just outside Coldfoot, my whole body shaking. The attendant asked if I was okay. I checked my watch. 6:47 in the morning. Wednesday. I had been driving for less than 7 hours. Everything was normal, but when I looked in the side mirror, I saw it. Written in the dust on my van, this rear window. 4 words in handwriting I recognized as my own. This is not the first time. I still work as a courier. I still drive through Alaska at night, but I never take the Richardson Highway anymore. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel it. The road that does not end. The hours that do not pass. The creeping certainty that one night I will forget to turn away. And when I do, I will be driving longer than memory allows, trapped forever in a nightmare that has no escape. Story 7. Broadcast. The engine was off, but the radio continued humming softly. Static came and went as if reacting to something nearby. I sat in the driver's seat of my rental car, hands still gripping the wheel, trying to understand why the dashboard was completely dark except for that glowing radio display. The numbers flickered, changed stations on their own, searching for something in the Alaskan darkness. I am a sound engineer from Portland, 47 years old, divorced, no kids, I had driven up to Alaska to record ambient sounds for a documentary about isolated communities. The kind of work that pays decent and gets me away from everything for a while. Away from the empty apartment and the silence that followed me everywhere after Sarah left. But this silence was different, terrifying in ways I could not explain. I had pulled off Route 1 near Seward around 9 that evening, looking for a quiet spot to set up my recording equipment. The forest here was dense, ancient spruce trees that blocked out the sky. I found a turnout beside a frozen creek, killed the engine, and started unloading my gear. That was when I noticed the radio. Still on, still pulling power from nowhere. The static shifted, formed patterns, almost like breathing. I reached to turn it off, but my hand stopped halfway. Something in that white noise made me listen, made me afraid to break whatever connection was forming. Then I heard the voice. It came through the static in fragments. A man speaking slowly, deliberately. His words were distorted, stretched like audio played at the wrong speed. He said something about the trees, about listening, about how many people had stopped here before me and never left. My blood went cold. This was not a normal broadcast. No station identification, no music, just that voice, low and patient, describing the exact spot where I was parked. The creek, the spacing of the trees, details no radio host should know. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, I was 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by mountains that blocked everything. But the radio kept broadcasting, kept talking. The voice said my name. It said, "Michael, you brought such wonderful equipment." I had not told anyone my name, had not spoken to another person in 2 days. The fear that gripped me then was primal, pure. I fumbled with the keys, trying to restart the car. The engine turned over once, twice, then nothing. Dead. The radio grew louder. The voice continued describing my equipment, my microphones, my recorder, like it was reading an inventory. Then it said something that made my hands shake. It told me about the voices I would record tonight, how clear they would sound, how many of them were waiting to be heard. I looked out at the forest. The trees stood motionless in the freezing air. No wind, no movement, but I could feel eyes on me. Dozens of them, watching from the shadows between the trunks. The darkness here was not natural. It pressed against the windows like something solid, something alive. The radio changed stations. This time it was a woman's voice, younger, frantic. She was calling for help, saying she was lost in the woods near Seward, giving a date. I recognized it, October 2019, 5 years ago. I remembered hearing about this. A hiker who vanished. They found her car but never found her body. Now her voice was on my radio, live, terrified, begging someone to answer. Then another voice cut in. A man, older. He was talking about his truck breaking down. Winter of 2003. He listed the mile marker, the exact turnout, this turnout, where I was parked right now. His voice cracked with fear as he described something approaching through the trees. Something that did not move like an animal. More voices joined, overlapping, dozens of them, all reporting their locations, all describing this same stretch of road, all begging for rescue that never came. The static between them sounded like wind, like whispers, like the forest itself was speaking through the radio waves. I grabbed my recorder, pure instinct, years of training taking over. If this was real, if I was somehow picking up voices from the past, I needed to document it. I hit record and held the microphone toward the radio. The levels spiked immediately, redlining. The voices grew louder, more distinct. They were not broadcast anymore. They were screaming. Something tapped on the window. I spun around. A face, pressed against the glass, pale, lips moving. The woman from the radio, the hiker from 2019. But she looked wrong. Her skin was too tight, her eyes too wide, frozen in an expression of eternal terror. She mouthed words I could not hear over the screaming radio. More faces appeared at the other windows, surrounding the car. Men, women, different ages, all with that same horrifying expression, all pressing against the glass. Their breath should have fogged the windows. It did not. They were not breathing. Not anymore. The radio static formed words. Clear now, no distortion. It said I had 20 minutes before the battery died completely. Before the doors would unlock on their own. Before I would join them in the forest. Broadcasting my fear for the next person who stopped here. I tried the engine again. Nothing. Checked my phone. Still no signal. The recording equipment was my only connection to the outside world. And it was picking up everything. The voices, the static, the scratching on the windows. All of it captured in crystal clarity on my digital recorder. That gave me an idea. A desperate, terrifying idea. If these voices could broadcast through the radio, maybe I could broadcast back. Send out a signal, a call for help that might reach someone. Anyone, I grabbed my portable transmitter. It was weak, only good for a few miles under perfect conditions. But it was all I had. I set it to emergency frequencies and started broadcasting, giving my location, describing what was happening. My voice shook, cracked, but I kept talking. The faces at the windows reacted, pulled back. The radio static grew angry, violent. The voices screamed at me to stop, to be quiet, to accept what was coming. They said broadcasting would only make it worse, would draw attention from something deeper in the forest, something that listened to all transmissions, something that collected voices. But I did not stop, could not stop. I broadcast for 10 minutes, 15. My throat went raw. The battery indicator on my transmitter dropped steadily. The faces returned to the windows, pressing harder now. The glass began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading from where their palms pushed against it. Then my transmitter picked up a response. Another voice, clear, present, a park ranger calling back, asking for my exact location, saying he was 20 miles out and coming fast. Real. This was real. Someone had heard me. The faces vanished. All at once, the radio went silent. The forest seemed to exhale. Release. The darkness pulled back slightly. I could see stars through the trees now. Actual stars. The air inside the car warmed a few degrees, but the relief lasted only seconds, because I realized what the voices had been trying to warn me about. The thing that listened to transmissions. The collector. It had heard me too. And it was coming. The trees began to move. Not swaying in wind, actually moving, uprooting, walking. Their trunks bent at impossible angles. Branches reached down like fingers. They formed a circle around my car. Tightening. The scratching sound they made against the frozen ground was like nails on metal. High, piercing, unbearable. The radio came back on. Different now, deeper. The voice that spoke was not human. It mimicked human speech but got the rhythm wrong. The emphasis. It said I had done something very stupid. Broadcasting without permission, without understanding the rules of this place. It said the forest had been collecting voices for 100 years. Everyone who died here, everyone who vanished, their last moments, their final words, all trapped in the electromagnetic spectrum, replaying endlessly. The radio was just one way to hear them. But there were others. The wind, the ice, the wood itself. Everything here was a speaker for the dead. And I had just volunteered to join the broadcast permanently. The trees pressed against the car. Metal groaned. Glass shattered. I covered my face as fragments rained down. Freezing air rushed in. I could smell decay. Old death. The trees were full of it. Bodies pressed into the bark. Faces emerging from the wood grain. All still screaming. Still broadcasting. Headlights appeared on the road. The ranger. He was here. His truck skidded to a stop. Spotlight flooding the turnout. The trees froze. Stopped moving. They could not maintain the illusion with a witness. With someone else present. The forest needed isolation to hunt. The ranger pulled me from the wreckage of the rental car. Asked what happened. I tried to explain. Showed him the recording equipment. Played back what I had captured. His face went pale. He knew. Had seen this before. He said 3 other people had disappeared from this exact spot in the last decade. Always at night. Always alone. Always found with their radios still on. He drove me back to Seward. I left Alaska the next morning. Flew home without my equipment. Without anything except my recorder. The one piece of evidence. Proof that what I experienced was real. But here's the truly disturbing part. The part that keeps me awake. When I play back the full recording at home, I heard something I had missed in the panic. In the background, behind all the screaming voices, there was another sound. Rhythmic, mechanical, like a heartbeat, but also like a broadcast carrier wave. Steady, infinite. The forest was not just collecting voices. It was feeding them to something. Something that lived in the static between stations. Something vast and patient that had been listening since the first radio transmission ever cracked through these mountains. And I had spoken directly to it, given it my voice, my name, my fear, all recorded in perfect digital clarity. Now my radio at home turns itself on sometimes. Late at night, when I'm alone, it cycles through stations, looking, searching. The static forms words I almost recognize. My own words, played back wrong, stretched, changed, like something is learning to mimic me. I covered the radio, unplugged it, threw it away. But the transmissions continue, through my phone, my laptop, any speaker, anywhere I go. The forest followed me home through the airwaves. And every broadcast pulls me closer to that darkness. That place where all the lost voices go. Sometimes I hear them calling. All those people from the forest. They want me to come back. To finish what I started. To add my voice to the eternal broadcast. And the terrifying thing, the thing I cannot escape, is that part of me wants to answer. Wants to return to that turnout. To finally understand what lives in the static. What collects us all? The radio stayed on. Even now, even here, humming softly, waiting, and one night soon, I know I will listen. Really listen. And when I do, I will hear myself already there. Already broadcasting. Already lost. Story 8. Pedal I never let go. The car was slowing down, and my foot wasn't on the brake. That is the terrifying part one keep coming back to. The part that makes my hands shake even now. 3 weeks later, whenever I slide behind the wheel, my truck was decelerating on a straight stretch of Alaskan highway, losing speed like something was physically holding it back, and I wasn't doing a damn thing to cause it. My name is David, and I've been a field engineer for an oil company out of Anchorage for 17 years. I drive these roads constantly, through every kind of weather, every season, every condition the wilderness can throw at you. I know how vehicles behave. I understand physics and mechanics and the simple, reliable rules that keep tons of metal and glass moving in the direction you point them. But on that October night, those rules stopped applying. I was heading south on the Richardson Highway, about 40 miles outside of Glen Ellen. Just me, the darkness, and endless stretches of empty road carved through forests that have stood since before this country existed. It was close to midnight. No other vehicles. No lights except my headlights cutting through the black, and even those seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was pushing back. The scary thing started so gradually I almost didn't notice. My speedometer needle began dropping. 70 miles per hour, then 65, then 60. The engine wasn't struggling. No warning lights, no strange sounds, just this smooth, steady deceleration that felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately identify. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The engine revved, but my speed kept falling. 55, 50, 45. That is when the creeping horror started to set in. Something was overriding my control. Something was deciding how fast I could go, and it wanted me slower. Wanted me to take my time with whatever was coming. I checked my mirrors. Empty road behind me, swallowed by darkness that seemed thicker than it should be. Ahead, my headlights showed nothing but pavement and tree line and the faint white line marking the edge of the highway. Normal. Except nothing about this felt normal anymore. 40 miles per hour now. 35, 30. My heart started hammering. I tried the brake, thinking maybe something was wrong with the pedal linkage. Maybe my foot was somehow pressing both pedals without realizing it. But when I touched the brake, the truck slowed even faster, responding normally to that input even as it ignored my attempts to accelerate. 25 miles per hour. 20, 15. The disturbing realization hit me that I was going to stop. Right here, in the middle of nowhere, in darkness so complete it felt like the world ended 10 feet beyond my hood. And whatever was making this happen wanted me stopped, needed me stopped. I should have been terrified of breaking down, should have been worried about freezing to death or waiting hours for another vehicle to pass. But the fear crawling up my spine wasn't about mechanical failure or cold or inconvenience. It was about purpose, about the chilling certainty that something had reached out from the darkness and grabbed my truck like a hand closing around a toy, slowing it down with deliberate intent. 10 miles per hour. 5, 3. I came to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. For a long moment, I just sat there, engine idling, hands gripping the wheels so hard my knuckles went white. My breath came in short gasps that fogged the windshield. The silence outside was absolute. No wind, no animals, no sound at all except the truck, its engine, and the blood rushing in my ears. Then my headlights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just died, leaving me in darkness so total it felt like being buried alive. I fumbled for the light switch, clicking it off and on frantically, but nothing happened. The dashboard lights were still glowing, the engine still running, but the headlights refused to work. That's when I saw the shape on the road ahead. It was barely visible in the faint glow from the dashboard, maybe 30 feet in front of the truck. A dark mass lying across the pavement. Too big to be an animal, too still to be alive. Just a shadow against slightly lesser shadow, but definitely there, definitely real. Every horror movie I ever seen screamed at me to lock the doors and wait for dawn. Do not investigate. Do not leave the vehicle. Do not give the darkness what it wants. But here is the terrifying truth about real fear, the kind that grips you in actual danger rather than fiction. It doesn't always make you freeze. Sometimes it makes you need to know, need to understand, because the unknown is worse than almost any reality, and sitting in that truck not knowing what was out there felt like slow, suffocating death. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and opened the door. The cold hit me first. October in Alaska is serious cold, the kind that finds every gap in your clothing and reminds you that nature doesn't care if you survive. But underneath the cold was something else. A smell, faint but distinctive, gasoline and copper and something organic that made my stomach turn. I stepped onto the pavement, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and approached the shape. It was a car, or had been, a sedan, dark blue or black, impossible to tell in this light. It was positioned perpendicular across both lanes, driver, its door facing me, like it had spun out and stopped. But there were no skid marks, no signs of impact, just this vehicle sitting in the middle of the highway as if someone had carefully placed it there. The creepy part was the door. It was open, not thrown wide like someone had fled in panic, but open just a few inches, the way you leave it if you were coming right back. I moved closer, my flashlight beam shaking as my hand trembled. The smell grew stronger, definitely gasoline now, but also something else. Something that made the lizard part of my brain scream warnings I couldn't quite translate into conscious thought. I reached the driver's door and pulled it fully open. Empty. No driver. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just an empty seat and keys still in the ignition. The engine was off, but when I touched the hood, it was warm. Recently driven. Recently stopped. Recently abandoned. My beam swept the interior. Nothing unusual. Fast food bag on the passenger seat. Coffee cup in the holder. Phone charging cable plugged into the dash. All the mundane details of normal life, which somehow made their absence more eerie than finding something horrifying would have been. Where did they go? I backed away from the car, flashlight sweeping the surrounding darkness. The forest pressed close on both sides of the highway, trees forming walls of shadow that my beam couldn't penetrate more than a few feet. Anything could be hiding there. Anyone could be watching. That's when I noticed my truck. The headlights were on again. I hadn't touched them, hadn't gone near the vehicle, but they were blazing now, bright and normal, illuminating the abandoned car and the highway and me standing between them like an actor on a stage. And in that light, I saw the footprints. They led from the driver's door of the abandoned car into the forest. Not panicked running, steady walking, purposeful strides that went straight into the trees and disappeared. One set of prints, adult-sized, recent enough that the dust they disturbed hadn't settled yet. The disturbing question hit me. Had they walked into the forest, or had something walked out? I should have gotten back in my truck right then. Should have driven around the abandoned car and gotten the hell away from this place. But something made me follow those prints to the tree line. Some terrible need to understand what had happened here. I reached the spot where the footprints entered the forest and stopped. My flashlight beam showed them continuing deeper into the trees, but only for about 10 feet. Then they just ended. Not turned around, not climbed a tree, not scattered or confused, just stopped, mid-stride, like whoever made them had been erased from existence. The nightmare logic of it made my head spin. People done, they just vanish. Tracks done, they just end. There had to be an explanation, a rational reason for what I was seeing. But standing there in the cold darkness with my flashlight showing impossible things, rationality felt like a memory from another life. I heard something behind me. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound. A dead spot in the ambient noise of the forest where something had moved and created a pocket of terrible silence. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting wild arcs through the darkness. Nothing, just trees and shadows and my truck sitting on the highway with its headlights blazing and the abandoned car beside it, and this overwhelming sense that I was being watched by something that didn't want to be seen. I ran back to my truck, abandoning any pretense of calm investigation. My boots pounded pavement and my breath came in ragged gasps and every shadow seemed to reach for me as I passed. I yanked open my door, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut hard enough to make the whole vehicle shake. My hands fumbled with the gear shift. I threw it into drive and pressed the gas pedal. Nothing happened. The engine revved, the transmission engaged, but the truck didn't move. Not an inch, like it was bolted to the pavement or caught in concrete that had hardened around the tires. The scary realization crept over me with horrible certainty. Whatever had stopped me here wasn't done with me yet. I tried reverse, same result. Engine screaming, tires spinning uselessly, vehicle going absolutely nowhere. I was trapped, held in place by forces I couldn't see or understand or fight. That's when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the man standing behind my truck. He was just there. No walking up, no emerging from the forest. Just suddenly present in my mirror, standing about 20 feet back, perfectly illuminated by my taillights. He was wearing normal clothes. Jeans, flannel jacket, work boots. Could have been any guy you'd see at any gas station or diner across Alaska. Except for his face. His face was wrong. Not disfigured or monstrous. Wrong in a subtler, more disturbing way. Like someone had described a human face to an artist who'd never actually seen one. And they'd gotten all the parts right but put them together in arrangements that didn't quite work. He was staring at me. Or at the truck. Hard to tell with eyes that didn't quite point the same direction. And he was smiling. The kind of smile that comes from somewhere other than happiness. The kind that means things you don't want to think about. I looked away from the mirror, down at my pedals, trying to understand why the truck wouldn't move. And that, when I saw it, my foot was on the brake. Not resting on it, pressing it. Hard. So hard my calf muscle was cramping from the sustained pressure. And I had no memory of putting it there. No awareness of the action. My conscious mind thought I was pressing the gas, was trying desperately to escape, but my foot had other ideas. The chilling truth hit me like ice water. I'd been braking this whole time. Ever since the truck first started slowing on the highway, my foot had moved to the brake without my knowledge, without my permission, and had been pressing it for longer than I could remember. How long? How far back did this go? When had I lost control of my own body? I tried to lift my foot, tried to move it to the gas pedal, but it wouldn't respond. The muscles ignored every signal my brain sent, keeping steady pressure on the brake like they'd been given different orders from a different source. In the mirror, the man with the wrong face started walking toward me. Not rushing, taking his time. Why hurry when your prey can move? Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I grabbed my right leg with both hands and physically pulled it off the brake pedal, fighting against muscles that resisted like they belonged to someone else. The effort made me scream, tendons straining, something tearing in my thigh, but finally my foot came free and slammed down on the gas. The truck lurched forward with a roar of engine and squealing tires. I swerved around the abandoned car, nearly clipping its bumper, and accelerated hard. 40 miles per hour, 50, 60, the speedometer needle climbing like it was being chased. I didn't look in the mirror. Didn't want to see if the man was still standing there or if he moved or if he was somehow closer than physics should allow. I just drove, hands locked on the wheel, foot welded to the gas pedal through sheer force of will. After 20 minutes of driving, my headlights caught something on the shoulder. Another car, different make and model from the first one, but sitting in almost the same position. Door open, engine warm, nobody inside. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Just noted it and kept driving and tried not to think about how many more might be out here. How many people had been slowed down and stopped and made to walk into the forest on feet that weren't entirely their own anymore. The disturbing thing I realized was that I'd been lucky. Whatever had taken control of my foot, whatever had made me brake when I thought I was accelerating, had released me. Let me go. But how many others hadn't been released? How many were still out there, feet locked on brake pedals in abandoned vehicles, waiting for something to tell them what to do next? I made it back to Anchorage as dawn was breaking, reported the abandoned cars to the state troopers. They checked it out, found nothing. No vehicles, no tracks, no evidence that anything I described had ever existed. Just empty highway and forest and their implication that maybe I'd been driving too long, seeing things, making up stories. But here is the terrifying part they couldn't explain away. My truck, this black box data. Modern vehicles record everything. Speed, braking, acceleration, all of it stored digitally in case of accidents. The data showed exactly what I remember. My truck slowing from 70 to 0 over 15 minutes. Engine at high RPM but vehicle decelerating. And throughout that entire time, consistent pressure on the brake pedal. The eerie conclusion was inescapable. My foot had been on the brake for 15 solid minutes, while my conscious mind believed it was on the gas. I lost control of my own body, and I hadn't even known it. I'd done to drive that highway anymore. Done to take night runs. Done to go anywhere the darkness gets too thick and the silence gets too deep. Because now I know the terrifying truth. Sometimes the danger isn't out there in the shadows. Sometimes it's already inside you, waiting, controlling, making you do things you don't to remember choosing. And the most disturbing question of all, the one that keeps me awake at night. How do I know it's really gone? How do I know my foot is actually on the gas pedal right now, and not the brake? How does anyone know when their body stops being entirely theirs? Maybe those people in the abandoned cars thought they were driving away too. Maybe they believed they were safe right up until the moment they realized their feet had been carrying them into the forest all along. I check my pedals obsessively now, look down every few seconds while driving, make sure my foot is where I think it is, doing what I think it is doing. But sometimes, late at night, I feel it twitch, feel it wanting to press down on the brake, feel something else trying to take control again, and I wonder if I'm already slowing down without realizing it, if I'm already being stopped, if the next time will be the last time. The highway is still there, still dark, still waiting, and somewhere on it, I think something is still waiting for me to come back, to slow down one more time, to stop, to walk. Story 9. Same bend, again. A haunting true confession. What if I told you that you could drive the same road for 3 hours and end up in exactly the same place you started? What if I told you that time itself stopped working the way you thought it did? What if I told you that I'm still not sure if I ever actually left that highway, or if some part of me is still out there driving through the darkness? My name is Marcus, and I am a truck driver. I've spent the last 15 years hauling freight across America. I know highways better than I know my own home. I can navigate in the dark, in fog, in blizzards, with my eyes closed. I've driven through every type of terrain, every type of weather, in conditions that would terrify normal people. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on the Dalton Highway in Alaska. The Dalton is one of the most remote and eerie highways in North America. It stretches 500 miles from Fairbanks up to Prudhoe Bay, cutting through wilderness so vast and empty that you can drive for hours without seeing another human being. The landscape is hostile and unforgiving. The darkness up there, especially in the winter months, is a different kind of darkness than what exists in the lower 48. It's a darkness that feels alive, that seems to push back against your headlights, that makes you feel like the only creature on a dead planet. I had been hauling drilling equipment up to an oil facility, a job that took me deep into the Alaskan interior. The drive up had been uneventful, monotonous in the way that long-distance driving becomes after several hours. The return trip was supposed to be simple, 14 hours back to Fairbanks, maybe a stop or two for coffee and fuel, then home to my family. I left the facility at 6 in the evening. The sun had already gone down. It was October, and darkness comes early that far north. The first few hours of driving were routine. The highway stretched straight ahead, my headlights cutting through the eerie blackness, nothing but forest and the occasional frozen lake visible beyond the pavement. I was making good time, well above the speed limit, pushing the truck forward through the chilling night. I had done this drive a dozen times before. I knew every stretch of it, every curve, every section where the road deteriorated or climbed. I was comfortable. I was maybe even a little bit bored. Around 9 o'clock, I noticed something unsettling beginning to happen. The landmarks I was passing didn't match my expectations. I had driven this road so many times that I had developed an internal clock. I knew roughly how long each section should take, but on this night, the timing seemed off. I was seeing familiar terrain sooner than I should have been seeing it. A distinctive curve in the road, a rock formation, a particular cluster of trees, all appearing before they should have. I told myself it was nothing. Highway fatigue was playing tricks on my mind. I was probably just misremembering the layout of the road. My internal clock was probably wrong. These were the kinds of rationalizations that I made to myself, desperate explanations for something that was already beginning to feel seriously disturbing and wrong. Then I saw the mailbox. It was a small, red mailbox on a wooden post, standing alone on the side of the road in the middle of absolute nowhere. I had no memory of ever seeing this mailbox before, and yet the moment I saw it, I had the terrifying, unsettling sensation that I had passed it earlier on this exact same drive. I checked the odometer reading. I checked the time. My calculations suggested that I had driven approximately 120 miles since leaving the facility. That seemed right. That seemed consistent with how long I had been driving. But if I had already seen that mailbox, then where had I seen it? I pushed the feeling aside. I turned up the radio and tried to focus on the road ahead. The eerie darkness pressed against the windshield. My headlights illuminated maybe 150 feet of asphalt ahead of me before the darkness swallowed everything. Beyond that, there was nothing. No light, no reference points, just the terrifying void of the Alaskan wilderness. I drove for another 30 minutes. The landscape began to feel more and more familiar. too familiar. The horror and creeping dread that I was beginning to experience grew sharper, more acute. I was seeing terrain that I recognized, curves in the road that I had definitely seen before on this drive. And it was all appearing in the wrong sequence. It was as if the road was rearranging itself, showing me sections out of order, creating a nightmare geography that didn't match my memories. Then I came around a particular bend in the road. It was a sharp, eerie curve to the left, where the highway bent around a rocky outcropping. The curve was distinctive because the rock formation created a natural frame, and there was a particular piece of broken fence that stood just beyond the road on the far side of the curve. I remembered this bend specifically because I had passed it near the beginning of my drive back toward Fairbanks. I had passed it 3 hours ago, and I was passing it again. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that I thought my wrists might break. The chilling realization washed over me like ice water. I had not driven forward. Somehow, impossibly, I had circled back. I was seeing the same terrain again, approaching the same curve from the same direction. The odometer told me that I had driven 160 miles since the facility. But I had driven less than 120 miles to get to this curve the first time. That was impossible. That meant I had driven at least 40 extra miles. 40 miles that didn't exist on the Dalton Highway. 40 miles that I had no memory of traversing. I pulled the truck over. The sudden loss of forward momentum threw me against the seatbelt. I sat there, trembling, staring out into the darkness beyond the windshield. The silence was terrifying. The isolation was closing in. I was alone on a remote highway in Alaska, alone with something that was disturbing and wrong in a way I couldn't even articulate. I decided to turn around. I would go back the way I had come, back to the facility. I would report this to someone, get another driver, refuse to complete this haunting, nightmarish route. I made a 3-point turn on the empty highway, and I headed back the way I had come. I drove for what felt like 45 minutes, maybe an hour. I was watching the odometer carefully now, watching for landmarks that I remembered passing. The horrifying landscape of the Dalton stretched out behind me, dark and eerie and full of secrets. I was looking for the turnoff that led back to the facility, looking for any sign that I was retracing my route successfully. But the landscape didn't look right. It was too different. The terrain was wrong. The terrain should have been showing me rocky outcroppings and evergreen forests, but instead the landscape was opening up into something different. Something more desolate, something more barren. And then I saw something that made my blood absolutely freeze. I saw that distinctive curve again. The same bend, the same rock formation, the broken fence, but I was approaching it from the opposite direction now. I was coming at it from the side that I had just come from, meaning I had driven away from it and somehow ended up back at it from a completely different angle. I pulled over again. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought my chest might explode. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. Something was profoundly wrong with this place. Something was disturbing and unsettling in a way that went beyond normal explanation. The road wasn't working the way roads were supposed to work. The geography wasn't behaving logically. I got out of the truck. The cold hit me immediately, a shocking, terrifying blast of Arctic air that made my lungs burn. The silence was even more profound when I was outside the vehicle. There was no sound at all, no wind, no animals, no distant traffic. Just absolute silence and absolute darkness pressing down from all directions. I walked toward the distinctive curve. I wanted to look at it from different angles, wanted to understand what was happening. The broken fence was there, exactly as I remembered it. The rocks were the same. The curve in the road was the same, but something about it felt different when I was looking at it on foot. It felt like the landscape was holding its breath, like the darkness was waiting for something. I turned my flashlight on, and that was when I noticed something that made me realize that this situation was far more serious and terrifying than I had understood. The pavement of the road was different. Where I was standing, near the curve, the asphalt was old and cracked, worn through by years of harsh weather. But farther up the road, in the direction I had been driving, the pavement was newer, smoother, as if two different sections of highway had been spliced together. And the splicing point was imperfect. There was a visible seam in the pavement, a discontinuity where the old road met the new road. And the geometry was wrong. The new section didn't align properly with the old section. It was offset by several feet, creating a subtle but unmistakable mismatch. This was the chilling moment when I understood that I was not dealing with something that could be explained by normal circumstances. The road itself was wrong. The road itself was impossible. I returned to the truck. I sat in the cab with all the doors locked, and I made a decision. I would drive forward, not back toward the facility, and not back toward Fairbanks. I would simply drive, and I would not stop, and I would not deviate from the highway. Somewhere, this eerie, disturbing nightmare had to end. I drove for 3 hours straight, pushing the truck to dangerous speeds, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The landscape morphed and shifted around me. Familiar curves appeared and disappeared. That terrible, distinctive bend showed up at least 2 more times, approaching from different angles, appearing in different contexts, yet unmistakably the same formation. The darkness was complete and total. My headlights seemed to be the only light in the universe. The radio had stopped receiving any signal about an hour in. All I had was the sound of the truck, its engine, and the beating of my own panicked heart. And then I started seeing lights in the darkness. Not headlights from other vehicles. Something else. Shapes that moved with intention, that seemed to be following the truck. Shadows that didn't to correspond to anything solid. Movements in my peripheral vision that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. The fear reached a crescendo that was almost unbearable. I was losing my grip on reality. I was experiencing something that didn't fit into any framework of understanding that I possessed. The Dalton Highway, this remote and terrifying stretch of road, had become something other than itself. It had become a place where the normal rules didn't apply. I saw the lights of Fairbanks around 3 in the morning. The sight of civilization was so shocking and unexpected that I almost lost control of the truck. Lights, buildings, other vehicles. The terrifying, eerie isolation of the Dalton gave way to the relative comfort of a small city. I had made it. Somehow, impossibly, I had made it. I drove to the state police station and reported everything. The officers looked at me like I was insane. They gave me a breathalyzer test, which I passed. They asked me questions about drug use. They were convinced that I had somehow hallucinated the entire experience. But then I showed them the truck's GPS data. The GPS unit in the truck had recorded my route automatically. The officers scrolled through the data, looking at the coordinates of every mile I had driven. And what they found confirmed that something seriously disturbing and unexplainable had happened. According to the GPS, I had driven in circles for the entire time that I thought I was making progress toward Fairbanks. The unit showed me traveling the same stretch of highway, the same approximately 5-mile section, over and over again, dozens of times. The GPS showed me passing that distinctive curve at least 30 times during the 3-hour period when I thought I was making progress. But the odometer showed a completely different number. The odometer said I had driven 180 miles during those 3 hours. 180 miles of driving, according to the truck itself. But according to the GPS coordinates, I had never traveled more than 5 miles away from that distinctive curve. The 2 pieces of data were completely incompatible. They told completely different stories. The state police never figured out what had happened. They checked the truck for mechanical problems. They found nothing wrong. They had me take a psychological evaluation. The evaluation concluded that I was mentally stable and not suffering from any delusion or disorder. But something had happened on that road. Something that broke the rules of how space and distance were supposed to work. Something that created a zone where forward progress became circular, where driving straight became impossible, where the laws of physics no longer applied. I quit being a truck driver after that. I can't drive anymore. Every time I get behind the wheel, I feel the terrifying sensation that the road might start folding back on itself again. That I might find myself approaching that same distinctive curve from an impossible angle. That I might get trapped in that horrible, eerie geometry again, driving and never getting anywhere, watching the odometer tick forward while the world stays exactly the same. The worst part is this. I've done research. I've talked to other drivers who use the Dalton Highway. And I'm not the only one who has experienced this chilling, disturbing phenomenon. There are stories scattered across driver forums and late-night conversations of other people who have encountered that same impossible curve. Other people who have become trapped in a nightmare section of highway where forward motion doesn't work the way it is supposed to. Some of those drivers never made it out. Their trucks were found, abandoned on the shoulder. The engine's still running. The driver's gone. There is no explanation for where those drivers went or what happened to them. I believe they were still trapped in that eerie, terrifying loop. Still driving that same 5-mile section over and over again. Still approaching that distinctive curve from impossible angles. Still wondering why forward progress never actually takes them forward. And I believe that if you drive the Dalton Highway, If you pass that particular curve in the darkness, you might find yourself joining them. The road might decide to keep you. The curve might appear one more time than it should. And then you understand, as I understood, that some places on this earth have stopped obeying the rules of normal reality. Some places are haunted by something worse than ghosts. Some places are haunted by geometry that doesn't do work, by distances that don't add up, by roads that fold back on themselves and trap you in a terrifying, chilling loop that you can never escape. That distinctive curve is still out there on the Dalton Highway, still waiting, still appearing to drivers in the darkness. And somewhere in that eerie, disturbing loop, other drivers might still be driving, trapped forever in that nightmare section of road, seeing that same curve again and again and again, knowing with absolute certainty that they are never, ever going to get out. Story 10. Silence that followed. What if I told you that some things follow you home? Not metaphorically, not in your mind, but actually follow you across miles in time until they re-standing in your living room while you trying to sleep. That is what happened to me. My name is Marcus, and what I am about to tell you is completely true. I've spent the last 3 years trying to forget it, but I can. So I am sharing it with you now as a warning about a specific stretch of road in Alaska that most people don't know about. A place where something deeply wrong exists in the darkness. I was a truck driver for 18 years. Interstate hauling, mostly. I knew the roads like the back of my hand. Knew where the good diners were, which truck stops had clean bathrooms, which routes to avoid during winter. I considered myself experienced, unflappable, the kind of guy who wasn't spooked by anything. But that was before Alaska. That was before I learned that some fears aren't irrational, and that is exactly what makes them so terrifying. I took a job driving a refrigerated unit from Seattle to Anchorage. 3 days of driving through some of the most remote landscape in North America. I left on a Tuesday morning, and everything seemed normal. The weather was clear. My truck was running smooth. I had my music, my coffee, and the open road. I was genuinely happy. By Wednesday afternoon, I had crossed into Alaska, and something had shifted in the world around me. The landscape became increasingly isolated, the towns smaller, the spaces between them longer. I noticed there were fewer and fewer vehicles on the road. By evening, I hadn't seen another car for hours. Just me, my truck, and an endless expanse of forest and sky. That's when I passed something I'll never forget. On the side of the road, about 50 miles north of Juneau, there was a vehicle. A sedan, white, maybe from the 90s. It was parked perfectly straight on the shoulder, facing the direction I was traveling. The doors were closed. The windows were rolled up, but there was something wrong about it. The windshield was covered in a thick layer of dust. The tires looked flat. It had clearly been sitting there for a very long time. I remember thinking it was odd that no one had towed it away. In most places, a vehicle abandoned like that would be removed within days. But out here, in this remote area, it seemed like it had been forgotten. More unsettling was that there was no sign of what happened to the driver. No note, no explanation. Just an empty car sitting on the side of the road, and the creeping feeling that something terrible had occurred there. I kept driving, but my mood had shifted. The cheerfulness I felt that morning had been replaced by something darker. A sense of unease. An eerie awareness that I was very far from civilization. As the sun began to set, I decided to stop at a motel I spotted about 20 miles back. The place was called the Raven, Just Rest. It was the kind of building that probably had a disturbing history. 2 stories, faded blue paint, gravel parking lot. The kind of place that shouldn't be in business but somehow limps along, serving travelers who don't have anywhere else to go. The owner was a thin man with a haunted look in his eyes. He didn't ask many questions. He just handed me a key and took my money. Room 12, second floor, at the end of the hallway. As I climbed the stairs, I noticed the silence. It was unsettling, that absence of the usual motel sounds. No televisions, no footsteps, no ice machine humming, just dead, suffocating quiet. My room was exactly what I expected. Worn carpet, a bed with a thin mattress, a window that looked out onto the parking lot and the dark forest beyond. I set down my bag, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. That's when I felt it. A presence. Not something I could see or hear, but something I could feel with absolute certainty. The sense that I was not alone in this room. The feeling was so strong that I stood up and looked around. I checked the closet. I looked under the bed. I opened the bathroom door and turned on the light. There was nothing there. No one. But the feeling didn't go away. I told myself I was being paranoid. The isolation, the abandoned car, the scene, the creepy motel. It was all working on my mind, creating false impressions. I took a hot shower, got into bed, and tried to sleep. That's when I heard it. It was a sound from somewhere in the motel, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across a floor. It came from the room next to mine, moved across the ceiling, and then faded. I lay in the dark, listening. The sound didn't repeat. The silence returned. But now it was a different kind of silence. Watchful, hungry. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear something. A footstep in the hallway. A creak in the wall. A whisper that might have been the wind or might have been something else. By the time dawn finally came, I was exhausted and terrified in a way I couldn't explain. I packed my things and left without checking out. I just needed to get back on the road to get away from that haunted place. But something had changed. As I drove north, away from the motel, I noticed that the eerie feeling hadn't left me. It was still there, riding in my truck like a passenger. The early morning light did nothing to dispel it. If anything, the daylight made it worse, because now I could see clearly that something was fundamentally wrong with the landscape around me. The trees seemed wrong. Their shadows were too dark, too deep. The sky above was an unsettling shade of gray, even though there were no clouds. The road itself seemed to stretch out endlessly, as if the distance I was covering meant nothing. I stopped at a gas station around 8 in the morning. It was a small place, barely bigger than a shack, with a single pump out front. The building was made of corrugated metal, and the windows were so dirty I could barely see inside. I filled up my tank and went in to pay. The attendant was an older woman with white hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much. She didn't make eye contact. When I handed her my money, her hands were shaking. Without thinking about it, I asked her if everything was okay. She looked at me, and for just a moment, her eyes held something like a warning. Then she looked away and said nothing. The fear I felt in that moment was different from anything I'd experienced before. It wasn't fear of something specific. It was fear of the unknown. Fear of a place where normal rules seemed suspended. Fear that something invisible and terrifying was waiting just outside my perception. I got back in my truck and kept driving. The day wore on, and the fear that had started at the motel began to deepen. It was no longer a vague sense of unease. It was becoming something concrete, something that felt less like paranoia and more like awareness of an actual danger. I passed more abandoned vehicles, a truck with doors hanging open, a car with grass growing around it. Each one seemed like a message, like warnings that said, something is taking people in this place. By late afternoon, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The sun was in the wrong position. According to my phone, it was 4 o'clock, but the angle of the light suggested it should have been closer to 6 or 7. Time itself seemed corrupted in this place, twisted. I kept checking my mirrors, certain that something was following me. But every time I looked, there was nothing there, just empty roads stretching behind me, disappearing into the darkness. The horror was building now. The fear was becoming suffocating. I realized that whatever had happened at that motel, whatever presence I felt in that room, it had stayed there. It had followed me. It was in my truck. It was in my head. It was becoming impossible to distinguish between my own thoughts and something external that was influencing me. I drove through the night, barely stopping. I pounded coffee. I slapped my face to stay awake, because I had come to understand one terrifying truth. Sleep meant death. In this place, sleep meant that the thing that was following me could finally catch me. By the time I reached Anchorage, I was a broken man. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. My hands were shaking. My mind was fracturing under the weight of exhaustion and fear. Home didn't bring relief. The drive ended, but the feeling stayed. Even inside my house, after I'd driven back to Seattle, the silence followed me from the road. It lived in the spaces between my thoughts. It occupied my bedroom at night, standing in the corner, watching me try to sleep. My wife noticed immediately that something was wrong. I told her about the drive, about the abandoned cars, about the motel. I didn't mention the presence that followed me home, because I knew how that would sound. She suggested that I was suffering from exhaustion and stress, She recommended therapy. I went to therapy for 6 months. My therapist was convinced that I was experiencing a psychological break. She said the landscape of Alaska, the isolation, the stress of driving, all of it had combined to create a kind of extended panic attack. She prescribed medication, antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, but the silence didn't go away. It got worse. One night, 3 weeks after I returned home, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. I knew it was 3 because I looked at my clock. And in that moment, with absolute certainty, I knew that something was in my house. I could feel it moving through the darkness. Not upstairs, downstairs, in my kitchen, in my living room, moving through my home like it owned the place. I woke my wife. She turned on the lights. We searched the house. There was nothing. No windows broken. No signs of forced entry. But the feeling remained. It was there, waiting. Over the following months, things escalated in a way I can barely describe. Objects would move. My truck would start in the middle of the night, even though I locked it and left the keys inside. I would hear footsteps in hallways when I was home alone. The shadows in my house began to look wrong, as if they were cast by something that didn't exist in the normal world. My wife left me after 8 months of this. She couldn't handle it anymore. She said I'd become a different person, that I was losing my mind. She was right about one thing. I was becoming something other than what I had been. Then one night, I realized the horrifying truth. The thing that had followed me from Alaska wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to show me something, to teach me something. And what it was trying to teach me was that I wasn't the only one. I began searching online for accounts of other truck drivers, other travelers, who had passed through that specific stretch of road in Alaska. And I found them. Hundreds of accounts. People who described exactly what I had experienced. The presence, the time distortion, the feeling that something invisible was riding along with them. Most of the accounts were posted on forums and message boards that had been inactive for years. Many were from people who no longer existed. People who had disappeared, just like the occupants of those abandoned vehicles. I realized then that I had been marked, that I had crossed some kind of threshold in that motel, on that road, and that whatever inhabited that place had chosen me as a conduit. It wasn't haunting me because of anger or hunger. It was haunting me because I was now the bridge between its world and ours. And every time I sleep, it gets a little bit closer to crossing over completely. 3 years have passed since that drive. I haven't worked as a truck driver since. I can sleep more than a few hours without waking in terror. My wife is gone. My friends have distanced themselves from me. I am a man living in isolation, hoping that one day the silence will finally take me completely, because anything would be better than this endless, terrifying existence. If you ever drive through Alaska, if you ever find yourself on that particular stretch of road in the remote northern regions, pay attention. Look for the places where something feels wrong. The silent stretches, the abandoned vehicles, the buildings that shouldn't still be standing. And please, I am begging you, Don, to stop at the motels. Don, to take shelter in the small towns. Because if something follows you home from that place, you will never be free of it. The silence will stay with you forever. And it will slowly, inexorably transform you into something that exists between worlds. Something that can no longer sleep. Something that is neither alive nor dead. Something like me. These stories are not meant to be heard once. They continue night after night, on roads just like these. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories now, because tomorrow night, the road goes even further.